Ginny, welcome to the podcast. I'm very excited to chat with you today.
So am I. I've been looking forward to it.
Ginny, I'm a huge fan of yours, and we've talked about this before because I always, when I saw your profile and I was like, oh my gosh, I was like, your career story and your background is exactly what I'm kind of aiming for. Like that's what I look for, like when it comes to my own career development. So I'm very excited to just hear that story. I want my audience to hear. So tell us a little bit about you and kind of, the rich history of just experience that you've had so far in your career.
I seem to be at the age when I am asked this more often than in my earlier years. And I reflect on it and have been able to see patterns, which I think are interesting. You read, and many of your speakers may have alluded to, find your passion and everything will flow. And I'm not quite a believer in that, but that will come out as we talk. Right now, I'm a professor at Marymount University in Arlington, Virginia. And I teach in the MBA program and the DBA, the doctoral program. And I teach the organizational behavior, leadership, strategy, um, team management courses. I am not your finance person. Okay, so, and it's been a very rich journey teaching. I love it. And you'll see why in a minute. I also have right now my own company called Strategic Performance Group. And we have two areas of practice. I have three partners, and we do a lot of leadership development. That's one area, which includes dealing with top teams and programs that go on from everything from a week to a whole year. And then we do HR, comm, benefits, executive recruiting. And we split and surveys. We do organizational surveys. And then I have a third area in my circle, and I have a podcast like you. And my podcast, we have leaders and thought partners. And what does it take, given this day and age, with remote, with hybrid, to keep a culture alive, to keep the vision and mission so people have a sense of identity, which is still important. And so those are the three things. Luckily, they all intertwine. If they were three distinct things, I'd probably be, putting sticks in my eye. But and I noticed when I reflect that there are many pivot points in my journey. And what I did was something didn't feel comfortable. I assessed it and reinvented myself, but always carried along with me a core. And in the early days, I didn't know what that core was. I knew it intuitively. I couldn't name it. So I started off as an English teacher and loved the teaching part and got very frustrated with the administration and the fact that the person down the hall would show movies all day long and make more money than I did. Just how the system was set up, I found not very engaging. So it's around that time I had a friend who said, well, you can teach in business. And I knew nothing about that. And, there's this whole field called training and development. Well, and everything you are in terms of being able to create programs and get up in front of people, it's all there. So I got a hold of training journals like the ATD journal, Training and Development, and I read a whole year's worth of issues and got up on all the nomenclature. And I gave myself 3 months to find a job to infiltrate business training, and it was hard. We did computers were not as prevalent, so there I am at a typewriter type, all of these interviews and can we just chat, and lots of crying myself to sleep. But 3 months happened, and I got a job with AT&T. And the other marvelous thing about that was, now we know you come with a lot of expertise, they said, but we put you through a pretty intense month-long training on how blah, 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 blah. And I said, oh my God, this is ideal. And it was. And from there, I grew and started honing in on creating courses and teaching courses that were leadership and management oriented. And got a job, made a switch. I thought I had had enough of AT&T and made a switch to Lockheed Martin. And it was there that I had a really great mentor who would come and watch me teach sometimes, and I would be teaching leaders. And she said, I don't know if you realize this, but you are one of the most phenomenal teachers I have ever seen. And I said, boy. And I said, what's about that? And so we chatted, and I said, well, I guess that's my core. And so when you look back and you see it was, English teaching, then to teaching in business, then the topic of leadership. And that took me into facilitation and more one-on-one counseling, coaching, and consulting, basically. So I wanted to up my game. And I said, well, I should get a doctorate. And so the whole world of organizational development and the kinds of things that I teach, leadership and all that, was just perfect. And at that exact time, I pivoted and became a director of human resources, but it was a company that said, we don't want just regular HR folks. We want someone who would really bring the organizational development and help create this whole culture of learning. So once again, there was that teaching component as I climbed up the ladder. And then had a lot of things were I got my doctorate. I defended my doctorate 6 weeks after I had my first child, and it sort of all came together. And then I said, oh my God, how am I going to do all this? So someone called me up, and I got a job, the professorship job at Marymount. And I said, oh, I'm not going to do this for too long. That's when I retire. So what I think would be a great way to start a consulting business. And so I did. And so I was teaching and consulting and teaching and consulting. And of course, consulting is just another avenue towards teaching. And I said, oh, you know what? I'm not going to quit the teaching, even though my business was growing, because there was great synergy between the two. And I've been doing that combination ever since.
That's really, really awesome. And what I love, you've said so many different things, but what I particularly love, and I think that's interesting for my audience to hear, is that we often look for these kind of, quick solutions, like 2 steps to find this, 3 steps to do this, and there's truly not. And this is what I hear from a lot of my guests, is like, a lot of it is just like, hey, I want to make a change, not sure what it is, but this is interesting. Let me explore that. And that's what you did for that year. You were just kind of like diving deep into all of the learning and development stuff. And then you had that, you gave yourself that 3 months, like a timeline. You said, I'm gonna get into it. And that's how essentially it happens. And what I love is that in the back of your mind, you had this kind of urge to be with people and to teach and to facilitate. And I think that was kind of naturally coming out. So it felt right when you followed the opportunity. So it's like, although you probably looking back, that wasn't what you were thinking. You didn't have this like, I'm going to do this.
Right.
But that's where you ended up, and part of it is because you kind of knew what you enjoyed, and you kind of just allowed it to flow in that direction. It almost sounds like. So I find that very fascinating, and I think it's again
And there
I
were
how it's
along the
done.
way, and I love how you highlighted that. Along the way, there were people who tried to pull me into some different directions.
Mm,
When I was at AT&T, they wanted to make me a project manager. And they said, "Oh, you got all the right skills and so forth." I did, but I thought about, you know, being a project manager, in my mind, I sort of role played it. I said, "No, yeah, I just don't like that."
mm,
I had someone else who wanted me to go into sales. Again, I have some basic good qualities for sales. And this is where, you probably have with this with a lot of folks that you try to help. You can draw a circle, and in that circle, you have different spokes. I have the spoke for my career, spoke for family, spoke for some people, it might be religion, it might be playing the piano, right? So these different spokes,
mm-hmm,
health, that I want to keep active. So my wheel is in balance.
mm-hmm,
And when I thought about the sales, I said, God, and that constant meeting of people, and have I brought money in? I don't want to live with that kind of pressure. So even though I shared with you this, at every pivot, I took the teaching along. Um, yes, I guess that is part of what made me remind myself, what is it that you're valuing? And what is it about the whole about sharing and being in the teaching arena, in terms of lifestyle, in terms of seeing the light bulbs go on with people. Someone really questioned me deeply. So, what is it about the teaching? And it
mm,
got to that I love to see the light bulbs go on, make a difference. Making a sale won't make, well, doesn't give me that light bulb.
mm-hmm,
Okay. So, those were things that you begin to see that draw you, it's down, pull you
mm-hmm,
down your path.
mm,
And I like that other point you made. It is not easy. There are times. Now, here's something though, I think your listeners should remember. Um, accept the fact that you will need to reinvent yourself.
I love that.
It's like, well, it's been about 2 or 3 years. Where am I? Why
Mm-hmm,
am I feeling this itchiness? Um, what else? What's going on here? So take that time to assess. And that assessment part, to go deep, is hard. It's frightening because you realize, oh my God, I'm going to have to change maybe. And what is that going to mean? There's a certain risk factor
mm-hmm,
there. Um, and realizing that's what I have to do, though.
mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess there has to be this balance of excitement and fear, right? So not complete fear where you go into anxiety, but there has to be that excitement piece to it. And I think, and it's hard to recognize that sometimes. And it depends on so many factors. I mean, I've spoken to people, who, if you're in the wrong environment or you don't have that support network, it's, or you have people pulling you in one direction or the other, and it's the fear, and it's natural for all of us to run the opposite direction, and to recognize that balance and to recognize whether a particular pivot is the right for you. I think it's
Right.
scary, for sure. But I think it's I think it comes down to awareness, right? And this is what I battle with all the time because like I don't know what do you think in your experience is it that what would help somebody recognize that opportunity for the right change when it does come?
Mm. I love the word you just used, which is being aware and mindful.
Mhm.
That needs to be a part of your journey. It's not, okay, great, I did it. Now I'm here and I reached that goal.
Mm,
That no, there's going to be a little knocking on your door in a matter of time.
mhm,
Um, sort of, sort of related, but not. But it gets at this is I remember when I was working and I had 3 kids under the age of 5. I was fortunate enough that was we were doing well, and so I had help. And don't get me going about how the United States does not have good programs for children, but um, and I realized every few months it seemed like I would have a crash. What I mean is like, oh my God, this is crazy. What is it that I have to do? And it might mean that I had to rearrange my schedule, rearrange the nanny schedule, get a new computer, whatever it was. And then I sat myself down and I said, no, wait a minute. This is knowledge. Every 3 months, you're going to crash. Wow. Isn't that wonderful? Now I know,
mhm,
right? Ooh, it's a 2.5 months. What's happening? What might I have to readjust?
mhm.
So get over the crisis aspect of it.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable. It might be scary. Um, put your arms around it.
Mhm.
Well, here we are again, 3 months.
Yeah, I like it when you said earlier, you said, just accept that it's going to happen. You have to reinvent yourself. And I mean, that's what we have to do is even as individuals, as leaders, as an organization, right? It's just what it is, especially in today's day and age where everything's just moving so fast. And you just don't have a choice. It's just part of it. And I think seeing it, what I'm hearing from you is like seeing it as an opportunity is the mindset. The mindset piece, I think, is the most important, which a lot of people see change as scary, and it is. But I think
Yeah.
seeing it as an opportunity versus a challenge or versus something scary, seeing it as something exciting, I think that's, as easier said than done. But I think tricking yourself into believing that eventually your brain will follow suit.
Oh, it will. It's wonderful what you can tell your brain,
Yeah.
right? It's wonderful to put yourself in the space of, all right, it seems like I'm going to have to take on some changes. And so what do I have to revisit? I have to revisit what's important to me.
Mm.
And it usually means the reason, and by the way, what's important to me will change. You see, that's the other
Very good
thing,
point.
right? Uh, I remember my husband said to me when we decided to have a third child, he goes, and by the way, I want you to get a job where you work less but make more money. And that was the joke, right? We're both, yeah, yeah. Uh, but I thought about that a minute. And work less, make more money. I wonder how I can do that.
Hmm.
And that's where the combination of the consulting and the teaching came. And I had now incredible flexibility. And I was making steady money, not more money. But I was in control of that because that's what I needed with children.
Hmm.
So, how can I still fulfill myself?
Hmm.
Right. And I guess that's this. I'm trying to get to that point of yours of being aware and making it an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And trick the brain. I don't care if we have, okay, let's do a pro con analysis. Give me, fill up these 4 flip charts for everything negative.
Mm.
Now let's tear them down, jump all over them, set them on fire. Now let's look at how can we look at it as an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
What might this enable you to do more of or less of? And keep revisiting that list
Mm.
because you will have bad days.
Absolutely. And before we go into to talk a little bit about the leadership and organizations, because I'm very curious based on your experience, but I wanted to also point out that it's so important to also have that enjoyable, like the jobs that you enjoy. And I always say, like, not 100% of the time, because you are going to have your days where even if you love what you do and it's your own thing, you're going to be like, I just can't do it today. But I said, always look for that 85%, because when it comes to everything else in your life, if you're drained at work at 100% of the time you're drained, it's very difficult to be a good partner, to be a parent, to just continue to live life, and it becomes very exhausting. So I think, again, to your point, like being aware and mindful and following those little knocks that kind of make you say, okay, maybe it's time for a change, and expect that change. I think it's so important, because I see a lot of people that I work with where they kind of got stuck in that area for a little bit too long. They overstayed their welcome in that particular experience in their life, and it really impacts everything. And then it's much harder to make a change if you haven't made a change.
Totally agree. That's perfect. Yeah.
Mm. So I want to I'm really curious. So you've been doing leadership development and training and kind of teaching for many, many years. I'm curious, how have you seen, especially in the classroom, how have you seen the change? Have the themes of what was important in leadership, I don't know, 10 years ago versus today? Maybe there isn't a theme, maybe there isn't a change, but I'm just curious, like, what do you see as the biggest challenges for people when it comes to leadership 10 years ago versus today, for example?
Right. I think what has changed over the years is emphasis. When I think back 30 years ago, when I was just this little baby getting up there and training leaders at Lockheed Martin, I was teaching the same kinds of things, like you need to communicate with people. You need to reach them in a personal way. It's not just managing the project. It's not just, did we make the extra million? Okay. So there are these sets of what they used to call soft skills that we kept reminding leaders, this is going to be the difference. And even the Center for Creative Leadership talked about, they did that 20-year study. And these people that they picked as high potentials did indeed do very well. And let's say they all get to like a director level. Those that went beyond, the difference was their interpersonal skills. So then we get COVID, and we get this incredible change where leaders are saying, well, wait a minute, now what do I do? They're not in front of me. So I get to this day, I get questions like, well, how do I hold a one-on-one check-in on the phone or on Zoom? How did you do it in person? And of course, they weren't doing it very well then. And so that's what I mean by some things haven't changed. What has changed, though, is they now have to pivot, look deeper at what they were doing well and not well, and adjust that. How do I make it work in this new environment? How do I have a Zoom meeting and people are engaged? How do I know that the culture is growing, even though I have people all over the world? What kind of language should I be using that I didn't ask people? How can I ask more questions? How can I show empathy without coming off as crybaby? Right? Because that's their fear. The fear is, oh, wait a minute, I have this picture of what a leader is. And no, I'm
Mhm.
supposed to go around and be this softy. No, you're supposed to be human,
Mhm.
right? Human in terms of how you're talking to people, how you're relating. And then how can I help you do what we both need to do in terms of what's best for the organization? Conversations they didn't like to have.
Mhm.
That's what's changed.
Mm.
And I love it. However, there are tons of leaders that are really working it and doing well.
Mm.
And there's a bunch that are failing
Mm.
and even screaming, everyone back in your seats, everyone back into the office. The ideal is hybrid, a little
Mhm.
of both. You still have people who love to go to the office, and you still have people who like to work from home.
Mhm.
What people want is the choice.
Yes.
And grappling with that. And how am I a good leader every day is the change.
Mm. Well, I just think it's harder. I guess the reason some of those leaders are saying, get everybody back in office is because they don't want to change. They don't want to have to adjust on how do I manage this team in a hybrid environment, because it's really about them at that point.
And they're scared. They're
Mm-hmm.
being thrown out of their comfort zone,
Yes.
right? Why can't it be the way it was before?
Mm-hmm.
Let's not even talk about why it can't. It's gone.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Those days are over. Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, I do recruitment now, and I cannot tell you how, it's a deal breaker. If it's not hybrid, if it's not, or even fully remote in the tech world at least, where you're like, I'm sitting behind a computer anyway, like, why do I need to come into the office? So like the techies really don't get it.
Right.
I'm more on the side of the hybrid for sure, to your point, because it's funny you mentioned that study where they kind of track people's success past director level, how many actually make it, because I don't want to say joke, but I kind of joke about it. I said most careers die at mid-level, because to go from mid-level to that senior level, it's those soft skills. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts, working with kind of maybe some of the young people in your programs, because what I see is I don't see a lot of the young or up and coming leaders seeing that yet. I see this issue because I work with a lot of leaders who are at that pivot point and they realize it and they're like, uh-oh, or they're far beyond it and realize they haven't grown in their career because of this. But a lot of the young people coming up, the new generations, they don't take it seriously, that they need to start getting comfortable with having those interpersonal skills. Again, it's not for everybody, depending on the career paths and etc.
Right. That's right.
But for those that are looking to grow into leadership roles and want to kind of manage and all, they just can't get away with it. So what do you
That's right.
think?
I totally agree with that. In terms of the younger folks coming up, it's interesting. So folks that come into like the MBA program maybe are 5 years out from getting their undergraduate and are ready for the MBA. That's just typical. I get all kinds. And I'm shocked to see how little exposure they have had to workshops on on conflict and even the basics of how to manage people. Organizations seem to be saving that for, well, when you become a manager, that's when you'll need it. And so there they are out there in the world for at least 5 years, sometimes 10, and haven't had the exposure to see that these interpersonal skills are going to make or break them. Because it's not only the managers and leaders who need to be better trained, all employees, and especially the younger people who have grown up on social media, where they don't have to talk, they don't have to express an emotion, they can just push a button. They are coming into that even less equipped than
Mhm.
some of the earlier generations. And it's what courses that we have put into our MBA, at least 3 of them, where the soft skills are emphasized and where they have to. So how do you handle this situation? And you can see that it's the first time they've even been asked that question. There's a conflict, you're at a meeting, how do you handle that? Oh my God, I wish I had this earlier, in my career. So to get closer to your question, there's starting to be a realization. They're not too sure how to get it. So there is a crossroads, I think.
Mhm.
If they went right into an MBA, academia is giving the soft skills now.
Mhm.
And they're integrating coaching mindsets, and they're using the leadership theories of trust and empathy and authenticity, because now, luckily, we have the data. See, we
Mhm.
used to preach it 30 years ago. We didn't have the data because it was
Mhm.
still everyone in their nice seats going to the office, right?
Yeah.
Now we have data. Productivity is still up.
Mhm.
People are asking for a connection.
Mhm.
Uh, and so it's not only the leader who needs to be coached of how do I have a good one-on-one, the employee needs to be coached. How can I ask for something?
Mhm.
Right? Well, I haven't heard from my manager, so that must be okay. Oh no, it's not. It's so a lot more learning and exposure to what does that look like.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's so spot on because I see a lot of reports, and of course, the media spins it however they wish, but they talk always about the company should be doing this, the manager should be doing this, but they never focus on the individual. What about you as an employee and taking accountability? Because you might be lucky to have a great manager. In most cases, that's not the case. You will have a manager who statistically would have been in that management position for 10 years before they get any actual management training. So a lot of managers fall in that category. So if you're an individual waiting for your manager to do this or waiting for your company, I think it's wrong. And I think this is where the narrative really has to shift. In the media, when they talk about these things, it's like it's not just on the company. There's 3 responsible parties: the manager, the individual, and the organization. All 3 have to work together to create the structures and the resources, etc. But the individual ultimately is, in my opinion, responsible for their own career growth. And whether the company provides that or not, that's a different story. But then again, as an individual, for most people, they have a choice to make that shift.
Boy, do I agree with you. And again, in the early days,
Mm.
25 years ago, there used to be a course that I taught at Lockheed Martin called Managing Your Own Career.
I love that.
And it was, it, you know, here's what it really takes to be promoted.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how you have to make it easy for someone to see you in this kind of light.
Mm-hmm.
Here, here's how you have to network inside the organization. Concepts, and they loved this course.
Mm-hmm.
Then it went out of favor,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's the kind of thing that needs to cut back. And you don't have to call it that.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of managing your life probably needs to be taught. Work-life balance, and
Yes.
what are your skill sets, and what are you doing to keep them sharp on the job, outside. So much good stuff.
Yeah. Also find interesting is that we knew that this is important, like you're saying, like 25, 30 years ago, and then technology came over. So everybody was started focusing on digital skills and digital skills and digital skills, and these are still equally as important. But now that actually technology is way better than we are and smarter than we are, and all we need to do is really just learn how to use it, all of a sudden these other soft skills that we always knew, like communication has always been important. It's always been a challenge in organizations for as long as humans there have run organizations. It's a challenge we have today, and still it's, to me, it's like we knew this 30 years ago, yet we keep, chasing these trends versus just looking at the realities, like this is what it takes to work with humans. So I think that we need to just take a moment, remember that, and not, discredit it when something new pops up.
You are so right. Because here's the assumption. Well, and everyone could do that. Everyone knows how to have a discussion.
Mm.
No, they don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's the sad part.
Mm.
Whereas if, oh yeah, I'm going to go to a class to learn how to use this new software, and that's something tangible that I can touch, right?
Mm.
How about how you handled that conflict this morning in the
Mhm.
hallway?
Mm-hmm.
It's becoming more important now. And in fact, for one organization, I put together some mini case studies in a high-tech environment. So this software, blah, 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 and they had to do this and that. And then I bring up the problem. And the problem is always an interpersonal problem.
Mm.
So by the end of the class, no one could say, oh, that's just foo-foo stuff. Right? It's the nuts and the bolts. Huh. Well, what happened in this case? Every single person was very competent.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you have to hold up the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
It means, yeah, you have to learn that. You
Yeah.
have to learn it and practice it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something I teach in the MBA courses. And once they're exposed to it, they eat it up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think having that awareness, because even people who get promoted, they say, well, I've been doing a good job, and they kind of also assume, and their managers and the organization assumes that they're just going to keep going, but then they quickly realize that being an individual contributor versus managing now people who used to be your colleagues, that's when a lot of conflict arises, because all of a sudden you're becoming the supervisor for somebody you used to, share a desk with, for example, or, share same responsibilities with, and that's when a lot of conflict. And it's like managing that is very difficult, and it's, every new situation is going to require that next level of you, and oftentimes we're not prepared.
Totally. Yeah, totally flat-footed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is what happens. Yeah.
And so to this point, before I ask you the last couple of questions, you also, you mentioned you run the podcast where you really kind of invite to talk about these, topics, especially within the remote environment. That's called Team Anywhere, your podcast, right? So where can people listen to it, and what kind of guests do you bring on, so that, who's your ideal listener for this?
Yes. Yes, it's team-anywhere.com. And you could go right to that, which will then show you all the list of folks we've had over the past year and a half. And our guests are usually CEOs or directors of very large sections of companies. Or thought leaders who do a lot of research in the areas that we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And the listener is, quite frankly, anyone in an organization, because you're learning, here's what it takes to be a good leader now. Here's the struggle I went to. I couldn't be empathetic. or I didn't understand what being vulnerable was, or I didn't even know what it was like to look within myself and to realize, how do I know I'm being a good leader? It's when the people around me tell me I'm a good leader. So how do I ask for feedback? And that is the kind of leader we want to get on. And they'll some of them will talk about, how they were before COVID and now what they are. And some have always been in a good leader space. And how do they really keep that going?
Mm.
Because it's hard. So we have other leaders listening. We have practitioners like you and me, and we probably have and thought leaders in academia and think tanks.
Mm.
But I have had people talk to me, anywhere from the management level and above.
Mhm.
And I just listened to what I just said, management level and above. Why aren't the first line people listening?
Yeah.
Got to think about that one.
Mhm.
I got
Yeah.
to think, yeah, that's a whole
Absolutely.
new podcast.
Yeah,
Go
yeah.
forth and do.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, it's just it's super fascinating because like as humans, we're humans and the human nature is the same, and it's like every generation we're experiencing similar challenges, and yet it's like are we just going to continuously experience those, or like so it's quite interesting. I ponder these thoughts all the time myself, and I'm like, how are we still not getting this as like society? So, but I
Mhm,
guess it's part
mhm.
of just being human, and yeah, it's very interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and I feel like we've covered so many different aspects to kind of just the world of work today, the responsibilities we have as individuals, as
Yeah.
leaders, and so I really really enjoyed it, and I hope we can have another conversation at some point and go deeper even into some of these points. But I wanted to ask you just one last question before we wrap it up. And what is that one question you wish that people ask themselves more often?
All right. Well, guess what? It's not one question. Um, it's three. The first one is every once in a while, just ask yourself, what's holding me back?
Mm,
Um, we all have a gremlin of some kind, something that fear, make it more aware. Is it at play right now? So that you can do what I had suggested, which is embrace it.
mhm,
Don't run away from it. The other is a question I call, how can I rearrange my desk? And the bigger meaning of that is that notion of every 3 months, you may have to adjust.
mhm,
Because I tell people, you now just throw everything on your desk off, because it's the same computer, the same list, the same chart, the same calendar. You have got to look at all the pieces and reset if you want a different result.
mm.
So that's,
Love
well, it might
those.
be time to rearrange your desk.
Mhm.
And the last one is, who can I ask for feedback today?
That's good.
Yeah.
Super, super important one. Elaborate a little bit more for those people who are like, what does this matter?
Yeah. Right. Well, it goes to something I just said a few moments ago, which is I'm only as good as the people who have to work with me feel I'm good.
Mhm.
Right. I may go walking around thinking I'm a great leader. And then we start talking to some of the people and, well, not so much. And so I like to keep it simple.
Mm.
Again, people are scared to ask for that feedback. Oh, what are they going to say? And they're scared. So, um, How's it going? What are you working on? That's great. I'm doing a little personal checkup.
Mm-hmm.
I just like some feedback. What value do you think I'm bringing?
Mm-hmm.
And what can I do more of or less of to be even more effective in
Mm-hmm.
the next 6 months? And I'd like to put that, uh, the 6 months idea. And
Mm-hmm.
don't say indefinitely.
Yeah.
If you solve something in the next 6 months, okay, and people feel okay about answering those two questions. And once they get talking, you can get into something deeper if you need to.
Mm-hmm. That's really
You
good.
can't you can't go through being a leader, a manager, anything in the work world with blinders on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I always say feedback is a privilege and it's scary to ask for it for sure, but it's like that's your way to get better. And if you blindly just working through, that's how you quickly become irrelevant at some point. And you're like, how did I get here? We're like, well, you never asked for feedback, and people are not always gonna give it to you
Oh, no, no.
voluntarily.
Oh, some of us have seen those pictures where there's a person sitting at their desk and they have all those stickies all over them.
Hmm.
And that means they're over busy. Those pictures usually mean. What I think of is whenever you're walking down the hall or pick up the phone or are talking to people, answering an email, as soon as they know they are interacting with you, they already have a mindset about you if they've worked with you before. They already have put a bunch of stickies on you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like talks too much, micromanages, uh, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
This
Mm-hmm.
whole slew, because that's how we can't help. The brain can't help. The brain judges,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, because that's how the brain can slot
Mm-hmm.
and know you and so forth. However, changing that mindset that that person may have about you is impossible unless you ask for feedback.
Mm-hmm.
That sticky will remain on the tip of your nose for
Mm-hmm.
20 years.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know what's on those stickies.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I just made a note. I'm gonna follow up and get feedback from a few different people today. That's great. Ginny, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, really. I love everything that you're doing. I think your career is super interesting, and the value that you bring to your students and to those around you. I think it's brilliant, and I'm glad that more and more people like talking about these topics that you cover. So it's refreshing, and thank you again for making the time.
Oh, thank you. You're a fabulous host, and you really summarize and bring forth all the right messages.